Hi, I'm Delphine, and my sister's husband called me a beggar, out loud, in the middle of a bank I used to help fund. He smirked like I was nothing, and the rest of them just watched, like they'd done before. They erased my name from documents, group chats, family photos, even my mother's will. But what hurt more wasn't being left out. It was realizing they'd planned it all along. Why would your own family go this far, just to make you feel like a ghost? I arrived 15 minutes late. The valet didn't recognize me and asked twice who I was there to see. I mumbled something about a reservation under Whittaker, and he handed me a ticket like I was a stranger crashing someone else's party. The restaurant was glass, brass, and too many shadows. The kind of place people chose to be seen, not to eat. I had barely stepped inside when the air changed, chilled not by temperature, but by recognition. Or rather, the lack of it. No one looked up from their tables. No one waved. No smiles. The maitre d' glanced at me as if checking for a mistake. I walked past the bar, scanning for a familiar face, and spotted the main dining room behind a gold-framed arch. There they were, the Whittakers, laughing, sipping wine, perfectly posed like a magazine spread. My sister Sable sat near the center, radiant in a navy-sheath dress, her husband Lester beside her, with that practiced grin he wore like armor. Their daughter, my niece, leaned over, whispering something with a smirk. As I stepped closer, that smirk turned into words. "That's her," the girl said, not bothering to lower her voice. "The one Mom's helping, like a charity case." I stopped mid-step. My heels clicked too loud against the polished floor. I smiled, instinctively, the same way you smile when someone steps on your foot, but you're too polite to scream. No one turned to greet me. Not even Sable. I approached the closest waiter, trying to keep my voice low and steady. "Hi, I think there should be a seat for me at the Whittaker party." He hesitated, looked toward the back. Then came Lester. He moved with purpose, not grace. The kind of man who spoke first and thought later. "Delphine," he said, with the kind of tone someone reserves for a neighbor's dog that won't stop barking. "Didn't expect you." "I RSVP'd," I said softly. He laughed. Not loud, but enough. "Maybe next time, confirm with someone who matters." Then louder, to the waiter, to the guests, to the whole room it felt like. "We don't serve beggars. Maybe she should check the shelter downtown." Laughter followed, muted, polite. But laughter all the same. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply nodded and walked past him, as though I had been on my way to the restroom the entire time. My heart thundered in my ears, but my face held. No one followed. I reached a quiet corner near the back, beside a window that overlooked nothing. I stared at the glass, seeing only my reflection, too put together to be pitied, too invisible to be welcomed. They had done this before, in smaller ways. The missed invitations, the photos without me, the group messages I was never added to. But this was different. This was a declaration. I thought of my mother then, of how she always said family holds you up when the world turns away. She didn't live long enough to see this version of family, or maybe she had, and chose to look away. I stood still for what felt like years, long enough to hear toasts I wasn't a part of, to smell the roasted duck I wasn't served, to feel the weight of erasure settle into my bones like a second skin. When I finally turned to leave, I didn't make a scene. That would have given them too much credit. I stepped out into the cool Dallas air and walked to my car, heels tapping a beat that sounded more like retreat than victory. In the quiet of my driver's seat, I reached into my purse and found it, a small envelope I'd received months ago. Sealed, untouched. I had almost forgotten it was there. But tonight, I held it like a weapon. "Not again," I whispered to no one. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly through familiar streets until I found myself at the edge of White Rock Lake. It was mostly empty this time of night, just the quiet shuffle of leaves and the far-off glint of the downtown skyline watching from a distance. I parked and walked along the gravel trail, my heels sinking slightly into the soft earth, grounding me when nothing else did. You don't need to be told you're not wanted. Sometimes they just don't make space for you. That line looped in my head like a hymn. It wasn't the first time I'd felt this way, invisible in a room full of people I share blood with, but tonight it cut deeper. Maybe it was the way my niece's voice rang out so carelessly, or maybe it was the way Lester said what he did with that smug certainty, like he knew no one would stop him. He was right. No one did. I sat on a weathered bench, folded my arms, and stared into the dark water. My mind drifted to earlier that week, Thursday maybe. Sable's assistant had dropped off a new family photo album, hand-delivered in a thick white box tied with a satin ribbon. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't even known it existed. Inside were pages of glossy perfection. Holidays, birthdays, vacations, all meticulously labeled and captioned. I flipped through it slowly, not because I wanted to relive any of it, but because I needed to confirm what my gut already suspected. In every photo I should have been in, something was wrong. In one, I was blurred in the background, while Sable's family posed front and center. In another, my face was completely cropped out, only my hand visible resting on a chair. And then, the final page. A full spread with the title, The Whittakers, Our Legacy. There was no mention of me. No aunt, no sister, not even a footnote. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a revision. I let the album sit on my dining table for days, unopened, until that evening's dinner reminded me what it felt like to be airbrushed out of your own history. Back in the restaurant, just a few hours earlier, I'd arrived right on time. I had the confirmation email printed and starred. I even brought a hostess gift because I didn't want to be the problem, the bitter relative, the one who makes everything about herself. But when I walked up to the staff member near the reservation desk, she looked confused, tapped at her iPad, tilted her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name's not on the confirmed list." "No, I RSVP'd weeks ago," I said, my voice already slipping into that too nice register women use when trying not to seem difficult. "I have the email right here." She didn't even look at it, just offered that rehearsed corporate smile and said, "Let me check with the family." She never did. There was no chair with my name, no plate, no napkin folded just for me. Only a void, like the space I used to occupy had been filled in by someone else, and no one thought to tell me. I remember looking across the room as Lester toasted his mother-in-law. The laughter, the glasses raised, and Sable, not once looking in my direction. She wasn't ignoring me. She was pretending I didn't exist. It's a subtle kind of cruelty, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but etches itself into your posture, your voice, your sense of where you belong. Was this new? Or had it been building for years? Had I simply been too hopeful, too forgiving to notice? I thought about past holidays where my name wasn't included in group texts, where photos were posted with captions like, "Everyone made it," even though I was very much there. I remembered being introduced at events as Sable's younger sister, and nothing more. And suddenly, it wasn't just tonight that hurt. It was every small omission stacked like bricks, until the wall around me was complete. The truth hit hard and quiet. They weren't forgetting me. They were erasing me. I drove home in silence. No music. Just the hum of tires and the ache of clarity. Inside, I didn't even bother taking off my shoes. I went straight to the bookshelf and started pulling out drawers, searching for something I hadn't touched in years. Old files, envelopes, a folder with documents I'd once buried under sentiment, contracts, signatures, records I wasn't supposed to have but kept anyway, because part of me always knew. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the floor, papers spread around me like a map of everything they tried to take. Everything I was told didn't matter. "If I have no seat at their table," I whispered, "I'll build one they can't ignore." That night, I stopped grieving a family. I started auditing one. The clock glowed just past midnight, but I wasn't tired. My body ached from the weight of pretending, of staying upright in a place that never once invited me to sit. I'd traded my heels for socks and my silence for curiosity. I stood in the hallway of my apartment, staring at the hallway closet. Top shelf, right corner. That's where I'd buried it. Inside a battered box, labeled Taxes 2009, I found what I was looking for. The green folder. It was one of those flimsy ones you get from office supply stores, but inside were pages that had once meant everything. My mother's original estate documents, scanned, printed, marked in my own handwriting from the week she passed. I sat on the floor and started rereading everything. The original will had a section, Section 4, that left a portion of the family estate to me, specifically. My name was typed clean, no typo. Delphine Maynard. Not a sister, not a niece, not a vague beneficiary. Just me. But something was wrong. I remembered the funeral, the lawyer who read the revised will. The version he read didn't include Section 44. And the signature? In this copy, it was dated and notarized weeks before my mother was hospitalized. But at the funeral, the signature was from 3 days before her death. I stared at that timeline, heart thudding, and a new unease crept in. It wasn't just an omission. It was an edit. By 2 a.m., I had pulled out my laptop and drafted an email. Not to Sable, not to Lester, but to someone who actually mattered. Carla Greer, a paralegal who used to work for Mom's attorney. I kept it short. Carla, do you know if any revisions were made to my mother's will in the final 30 days before she passed? I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Sleep came in broken waves, interrupted by the sound of my own thoughts galloping through the dark. By morning, a reply was waiting in my inbox. Delphine, you may want to check the access logs. Something was amended remotely, on a Saturday night. That's all I can say. I read it twice. Saturday night. I grabbed my planner, yes, I still use one, and flipped back. That particular weekend, I'd been in Toronto on a work trip. No cell reception for 2 days because I'd stupidly left my international data plan off. I didn't even know Mom had been taken to hospice that week. I came home to find her already buried, and during that exact weekend, someone had amended the will. I didn't have to guess who. The following morning, I drove out to the Whittaker house. Sable was away. Palm Springs, a wellness retreat she'd posted about just days earlier. That meant the housekeeper would be the only one home, and she still liked me. Marissa let me in without a word. I told her I was picking up some books Mom had promised me. That wasn't a lie. I wandered the halls, pretending to look lost in memory, until I reached the portrait wall. The family history was curated like a museum. Every photograph framed in gold, perfectly aligned. Whittakers through the years, one caption read. Our founders read another. But in all of them, I was a ghost. In a photo from the 90s, I was partially behind Sable. My hair cropped out. In a Thanksgiving shot, only 3 plates were visible, though I distinctly remember being there. In another, Sable was holding a baby, my niece, and I was off to the side, blurry, barely in frame. Then I saw it. The legacy wall. 6 massive portraits, printed on canvas. Sable and Lester in the center, arms around each other. Their daughter, Lester's parents, and finally, their in-laws. Nowhere was I, not even in the caption. The core of the Whittaker lineage. I ran my fingers along the edge of one of the frames. It was cold, sharp. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just stood there, long enough for Marissa to reappear with a hesitant smile. Find what you were looking for? Almost, I said, just checking the archives. Back home, I opened my journal and wrote only one sentence. They didn't forget me. They deleted me. Then, next to it, I wrote the date of the will's revision and circled it twice. They rewrote history, and I let them. And then I opened the folder I swore I'd never use. The papers were stiff from years of neglect. I laid them across the kitchen table under the yellow glow of the pendant light, each document a breadcrumb leading back to a version of my life where I still believed blood meant loyalty. Names, numbers, power of attorney memos, legal terms I once read through tear-streaked glasses when my mother died, not understanding what they'd take from me before I could even mourn. A cold resolve settled somewhere below my ribs, the kind of clarity you get not from sleep, but from realizing you're done asking nicely. I picked up the phone. I wasn't sure why I dialed Aunt Lorraine first. Maybe I thought she'd remember things the way they were supposed to be. Maybe I needed one person to say, "This isn't right." She answered on the second ring. "Lorraine, it's Delphine." A pause. "I heard you made quite the scene at dinner." I hadn't said a word that night, but I let it slide. "I just have one question. Did Mom ever mention making changes to her will? Anything toward the end?" She sighed, long and heavy. Delphine, she was dying. What she wanted stopped mattering once the doctor stepped in. My heart clenched. "That's not what I asked. You need to stop digging into this. It's disgraceful. She's barely cold in the ground and you're already chasing money?" "I'm not chasing money. I'm chasing truth." "You sound ungrateful." That word stung more than I expected. Ungrateful. As if gratitude was the price of silence. As if I hadn't spent years biting my tongue every time they made me feel like the family's unwanted obligation. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, and hung up before she could weaponize another memory. Next call. The attorney's office. A receptionist answered with the kind of neutral cheer that only comes from script. I gave my name. Asked to speak with whoever was overseeing my mother's estate. "I'm sorry," she said after a beat. "We've been instructed to work only through the executor." "Sable?" I said flatly. "Yes, Ms. Whitaker is our listed contact." "I'm a direct heir." There was a pause. And then, in a voice as clinical as a cold scalpel, "Not in the final document, Ms. Maynard." I didn't reply, didn't slam the phone down, just ended the call and sat back in my chair. Silence again. The kind that isn't peaceful, but thick with absence. The kind that used to follow me home after family dinners, clinging to me like smoke. I found myself walking to the small wooden box on my bookshelf, the one with old letters and cards I never threw out. Inside was a birthday card from Mom, written in her slanted, looping script. "Don't ever let anyone tell you this family runs without you," it read. I remember the day she gave it to me. We were sitting on her porch. Her fingers were already shaking from the medication, but her voice was firm. "They all think they're in charge," she said, sipping tea. "But they wouldn't last a week without you cleaning up after them." I had laughed then. Laughed because I thought it was love disguised as sarcasm. But now it echoed like a warning I failed to hear in time. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I opened a spreadsheet. Bank records, land titles, joint accounts I was once authorized on, but mysteriously removed from. Every data point was a nail in the coffin of their version of events. I called my bank, transferred savings into a trust under a new entity, set up a meeting with a financial advisor I hadn't spoken to since before Mom passed, dug out the dusty folder marked Trustee Docs 2016. If they were going to pretend I didn't exist, I'd make sure the land they built their lies on remembered exactly who owned the soil beneath it. They locked me out of the house. I'll buy the land it stands on. Before I went to bed, if you could call 4:17 a.m. bedtime, I recorded one voicemail, calm, composed, deadly. "Sable, I don't want to fight you, but if you keep pretending I'm not here, I'll become impossible to ignore." When they locked me out, they forgot I still had the blueprints. 2 mornings after that final call to Sable, I logged into the dashboard for a company they'd all forgotten I ever touched. Horizon Biotech, one of the first startups I believed in. A decade ago, I'd scraped together a small investment while living off canned soup and cheap coffee. They laughed then. "Tech isn't your lane," Sable once said. Lester had asked, half joking, "Do you even know what biotech is?" I didn't need to know. I needed to believe in people who build from scratch. And now, Horizon was nearing IPO. Valued at just over $900 million, I leaned back in my chair, the hum of my laptop fan barely louder than my own heartbeat. I didn't feel victorious. I felt focused. There's a kind of silence that comes when numbers speak for you. I began organizing the next steps. 3 offshore accounts were already structured. 2 LLCs, both tied to trusts in my name only, had been dormant for years, until now. I wasn't rushing. I was methodical. Clean lines. No drama. They thought I needed their table. I was already building the land it stood on. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder I had set 2 years ago popped up. Review Draycott Holdings tax return partnerships. I smiled, almost bitterly. Even my reminders were more loyal than my blood. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, like pulling a string from a loose seam, I opened an email chain with Horizon's legal team. Subject: Board access clarification. Urgent. Message: I need confirmation of my seat reactivation. Also, initiate transfer of all Horizon investment assets out of Draycott Holdings. Redirect to 3R Capital Management, effective immediately. The reply came swiftly. Understood, Ms. Maynard. Action initiated. You still retain majority voting rights. Still. Retain. They hadn't stripped me of everything. Not yet. My breath caught as I remembered lunch with Lester 2 years back. We'd met at a rooftop restaurant, all glass panels and overpriced salads. He was in his element, talking big, talking loud. We weren't close, but he always had a way of wrapping condescension in compliments. You know, he had said between bites, some of the contracts, I've just gone ahead and updated them for you. Less for you to worry about. You weren't really in the mindset to handle finance back then. I'd nodded, naive. I remember thinking he was trying to help. Looking back now, I saw it for what it was. Control disguised as concern. I stood up from my desk, stretched, then walked to the printer. My hand didn't shake as I printed the formal notice. Notice of intent to reclaim. All jointly held investments initiated by Delphine Maynard. I slid the document into a manila folder, sharp corners against my palm. On a post-it note, I scribbled something quickly. I'm not angry. I'm awake. Before I could file it, my phone buzzed again. I assumed it was another bank confirmation. But no, it was a calendar invite. Subject: Family Legacy Estate Meeting. Organizer: Sable Whitaker's assistant. I stared at it, my lips curling into something between a grin and a wince. They really thought this was done. They really thought I'd sit in silence, accept the edits, wear the dress, and smile in the photos. Not this time. I tapped accept and whispered to myself, let's see how they behave when they think they've already won. By the time they saw my hand, the move was already done. I woke up before the sun did. My body ached, not from exhaustion, but from restraint. Rage held in for too long calcifies into something sharper, more precise. I reached for my phone. The estate meeting invite still glared at me from the lock screen. A neat little package of false diplomacy. The Whitakers were trying to present this like it was business. But locking someone out of their own name wasn't business. It was war. I opened the banking app. I needed to move my personal funds out of anything even remotely connected to the family network. My fingers hovered over the transfer tab. Error. Access restricted. I blinked. Tried again. Same message. Access restricted. I refreshed. Nothing changed. Then I checked the joint legacy fund, the one created by Mom before the cancer advanced, the one I had been contributing to for years. Same error. I tapped the help button. A chat window opened, cheerful as always. Hi there, how can we help? I typed, why is my access restricted on account ending in 3497? The response came 3 minutes later. As per instructions from the estate's executor, all account modifications must be authorized through the designated representative. Sable. Of course it was her. They hadn't just shut a door. They sealed every window, every vent, and then smiled while doing it. I exited the app. For a moment, I couldn't feel my hands. I opened the family group chat. Part reflex, part habit. I needed something to ground me, to remind myself I wasn't hallucinating the betrayal. It was gone. The chat thread that had existed since Mom's diagnosis, where we shared updates, doctor's notes, family photos, was no longer on my screen. I scrolled through archived threads. Nothing. I typed a message in the search bar, knowing it wouldn't land. No result. Not only had they blocked my accounts, they'd removed me from the digital rooms too. The ones where decisions were made, jokes exchanged, meals planned. I wasn't out of the loop. I was deleted from it. I stood up, still in my robe, and walked to my office. There was no anger in my breath, no screaming. I opened my secure drive and created a new folder. Prep Alpha 1B. Inside, I dropped screenshots, time-stamped errors, the chat response, emails, a copy of the will timeline, my notes from the estate attorney's rejection. Then I opened an old portal tied to shell companies I'd set up 10 years ago, back when I had just enough vision and just enough distrust to future-proof myself. I began rerouting accounts, one after another, through entities in Delaware, Nevada, and the British Virgin Islands. If they wanted to erase me, they'd have to spend years untangling the paper trail. Before lunch, I drafted a cease and desist letter, not from emotion, from precision. To whom it may concern, you are hereby notified that any continued obstruction of access to assets, accounts, or communications under the name Delphine Maynard will be considered a direct violation of fiduciary duty and will be met with immediate legal recourse. All instances are being documented. This is not a warning. It is a declaration. I signed it digitally and sent it to Sable's inbox, CCing the legal team that once represented Mom. No threats, no dramatics, just a record. By evening, I was back at the kitchen table, sipping cold tea when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. There was no human voice, just a robotic one, flat and mechanical. We know what you're doing. You've made this personal. I didn't hesitate. I was born into this, I said calmly. You made it personal the day you rewrote my name. And then I hung up. The room I entered wasn't just a meeting. It was a stage. But before I got there, before the conference room, the handshakes, the false civility, they tried to pull the curtain on me completely. It started with a leak. At least, that's how it was labeled when it hit my inbox, forwarded by someone at Horizon, who still had the decency to be uneasy. The document looked polished, subtle, like all dangerous things. Internal brief, Draycott Holdings. Right there in bold was the opening line. In light of recent tensions surrounding the estate, we wish to express our concern for Ms. Delphine Maynard's health. Recent behaviors suggest a pattern of emotional instability that requires compassion, discretion, and distance. They didn't call me crazy, they called me fragile. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched so tight my molars hurt. My name was wrong. Maynard instead of Maynard. Not once, but 3 times in the document. In official terms, that's just a typo. But I'd seen that trick before. Change a name, and suddenly your records don't match. Suddenly your authority, your title, your seat at the table, all in question. It was surgical, a quiet erasure masked as protocol. And then came the screenshots, private messages from family threads, not the group chat I'd already been kicked out of, but a separate one, filled with sideways empathy. She's never been quite right. Poor Delphine, she always struggled to keep up. One message from Sable's number cut deepest. I'm doing what's best for her. Someone has to. I called Julia from Horizon. She had been a board advisor for years, and one of the few people who used to take me seriously, even when I was quiet in meetings. Did you see it? I asked. A pause. Yes. Do you believe it? Another pause. I didn't think it was true. But your sister forwarded something about a breakdown. Confidential. The line went quiet. I hung up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I opened a window, let in the air, and let the lies roll off me like rain. They weren't fighting me with proof. They were fighting me with whispers. The most effective weapon wasn't accusation, it was concern. They were painting me not as volatile, but unstable. Not dangerous, just too fragile to trust. The kind of narrative that makes you look defensive the moment you deny it. Don't explain, expose. I drafted a statement, not from me, but from Horizon's legal team. Founder and financial visionary Delphine Maynard remains fully operational, engaged in her leadership role, and currently reviewing legal matters regarding private estate holdings. All internal structures remain intact. It was brief, cold, but for those watching closely, it was enough. The next day, I pushed a quiet campaign of my own, reaffirming contracts, reactivating email logs, reestablishing traceable authority lines in public databases. Everything I had, I locked down. And yet, I knew it wouldn't be enough to stop what was already in motion. That night, as I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, an email popped up. No subject line, no name, just text. Nice try, but they're already painting you out of the picture again. This time, faster. I read it twice, then replied with a single line. Let them paint. I'm about to change the whole canvas. The room I entered wasn't just a meeting. It was a stage. Draycott Holdings didn't waste money on modesty. Floor-to-ceiling glass, walnut-paneled walls, a custom-made boardroom table that probably cost more than the first home I ever rented. Everything in that room screamed curated power. I stepped in at exactly 9:58 a.m., just early enough to signal punctuality, but late enough to force everyone to look up when the doors clicked shut behind me. I was dressed in charcoal gray. No frills, no distractions. Hair tied back. No jewelry but the watch my mother had left me. Every seat was filled. Lester sat at the head, his fingers folded neatly on the table like a judge about to rule. Sable, to his right, wore that perfectly constructed mask she used whenever cameras were present, even though there were none today. Yet, no one greeted me, no one stood, but no one told me to leave, either. I walked to the far end of the table, opened my laptop without a word, and connected to the conference screen on the wall. The first slide appeared instantly. Estate timeline, verification and discrepancy log. I didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Let them sit in it. Let them wonder if I was bluffing. Then, with measured precision, I began. This is a chronological breakdown of every legal document tied to the Maynard estate over the past 10 years. It includes signature metadata, access logs, and document control chains. The screen flicked through pages, emails, date stamps, even IP addresses. Then came the image that shifted the air in the room. A scanned copy of the contract I was told I had signed at 21. A power of attorney clause that gave Lester control over certain financial assets for her protection. This signature, I said calmly, was signed on a day I was in Milan, speaking at a research summit. Here's the boarding pass, the time-stamped photo, and the transcript of the keynote I gave that afternoon. Silence. No one moved. Then the screen shifted again, this time to a dashboard. Horizon Biotech. My original investment. The trust connected to it. The fund Sable and Lester assumed had been drained or dissolved. I'd like to show you the status of Trust Account 2117A, I said. It was activated 10 years ago, controlled exclusively by me. Today it holds $1 billion in assets. I paused. One click. Transfer initiated. The screen blinked once, then displayed confirmation. Transferred to 3R Capital Holdings. To my name. In full. You could feel it. The oxygen pulling away from their lungs. Lester stared like he couldn't understand the math. Sable's eyes flicked toward the window, as if looking for an escape hatch. This isn't what Mom intended, she said finally, her voice thinner than usual. I looked straight at her. No, it's exactly what she prepared for. You just thought I'd never wake up. No one argued. No vote was taken. The meeting ended without adjournment. One by one, they stood and filed out in silence, not even bothering to take their notepads. I stayed behind, collected my things, closed the laptop slowly, deliberately. As I slipped the folder back into my bag, a junior executive I barely recognized walked past, then paused. He looked down at the table, then slid something across to me, a small folded note on company letterhead. "They're planning something," it read. "Watch your back." I didn't flinch, didn't ask questions. I just nodded once and whispered to myself, "Let them." I just flipped the table. Some truths don't need to be spoken. They just need to be lived. The day after the boardroom implosion, I stayed home. No meetings, no phone calls. Just me and a silence so thick it felt like a second skin. It wasn't peace. Not yet. It was the quiet hum that comes after something shatters. I sat in the living room, curled on the edge of the couch, coffee cooling untouched in my hand. On the TV, a local news anchor smiled through a segment about corporate leadership transitions. My name never came up, but Sable's did. Whitaker steps down from Draycott Holdings Board, citing personal focus and wellness, the Chiron read. No mention of forged signatures. No acknowledgement of the 1B transfer that had just rocked the company's foundation. No recognition of what had actually unfolded in that room. They spun it, of course. They always did. Dressed their retreat in silk and called it strategy. I didn't expect applause, but I did expect the truth to carry more weight. Later that evening, I put on a black dress and heels and attended a charity gala I'd RSVP'd 2 weeks earlier. I showed up on time, walked the red carpet with the same poise I'd worn in courtrooms and fundraisers. I smiled, I nodded, I played the part, until the recognition ceremony began. The host rattled off names, contributors, partners, legacy families. There was a brief pause before what should have been mine. Then, nothing. They skipped me. One of the organizers, a woman I'd known for years, looked directly at me and then away. Like she had rehearsed it. Like it hurt her more than it surprised me. A few heads turned. A few eyes avoided mine. I stood still, clapping for the next name as if I hadn't noticed. But I had. They couldn't disprove me. But they still refused to say I was right. That was their final move. If they couldn't silence me, they'd dilute me. Let the world believe I was just there. Present, but peripheral. I didn't push back. I didn't write angry emails. I didn't take the mic and correct the record. Because silence isn't surrender. Sometimes, silence is proof of victory, too big to argue with. Back home, I opened my laptop and found a message from a Horizon board member. Just wanted you to know, not everyone voted with them. I stared at the message for a moment, then closed it. 1 week later, Horizon crossed a $1.2 billion valuation. No press, no fanfare. I signed the document that made me the majority equity holder. Alone, in my apartment, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie. No ceremony, just ink on paper and a long exhale afterward. After that, I opened the drawer in my desk, pulled out the nameplate from the gala, the one where they'd misspelled my name, again. Ms. Maynor, like I was a placeholder for someone else, like the right name was still too much for them to give. Beneath it, I slid my mother's handwritten note back into place, the one she left for me years ago. I'd read it so many times, I knew every curve of her handwriting. They still won't say my name right, I murmured aloud, but they'll never forget who I was. Not every legacy is inherited. Some are rewritten, painfully, proudly, personally. It was a Friday morning when the package arrived. No name on the label, just my address in a familiar cursive. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was another silent reminder from a family that had made silence their most practiced language. Inside, there was a single USB drive. No note, just a sticker on it in my mother's handwriting, for her only. I plugged it into my laptop without expectation. What loaded was a grainy video, recorded in her bedroom, maybe weeks before she passed. The lighting was poor, her voice faint, but her eyes, they held. Delphine, she said slowly, as if the syllables themselves took effort. I know they've made you feel like a shadow, but you are the light that keeps this family real. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until the screen went black. Later that day, the doorbell rang. It was my stepfather. I hadn't seen him in almost a year. He looked older. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed how tired he always seemed when Mom was still alive. He held a small envelope, slightly yellowed, the seal still unbroken. She wrote this the week before she lost her voice, he said, eyes avoiding mine. I was supposed to give it to you, but I didn't. I was afraid. I didn't want the fights. I was a coward. He handed it to me, and I didn't speak, didn't move, just nodded once and closed the door behind him. I read the letter sitting cross-legged on the floor, back against the bookshelf. It was short, gentle, her voice in ink. I left instructions for you to lead. If they listen, guide them. If they don't, take what's yours. They will try to erase you. I know my daughters. But you were always the one who knew where the foundation cracked. There were no metaphors, no drama, just truth. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I folded the letter, placed it beside the USB, and carried both to the small wooden box I kept in my office. I unlocked it, laid them inside, and closed it slowly. Not to hide them, to preserve them. Proof that I hadn't imagined the warmth. That the cold came later. That someone, once, had chosen me. The next morning, I woke before dawn, poured a coffee, and watched the sun crawl up the horizon like it had nothing to prove. I thought about everything they took. My place at the table, my name in the file, my voice in the room. They stole my name in rooms full of noise, I whispered, but she gave it back in a whisper. Around noon, I sat down at my desk to clear emails. Mostly routine. A few clients. One from Horizon confirming equity transfers. Then I saw it. Subject: Nomination Confirmation, National Women's Leadership Conference. Sender: Leadership, capitalvision.org. You've been nominated to speak at our annual conference. You were recommended by someone who believes in quiet power. We'd be honored to have you share your story. I leaned back in my chair, stared at the screen for a long time. No one had ever asked me to speak. Not at holidays, not at board meetings, not even at Mom's funeral. And now, I was being asked to speak, because I hadn't screamed, because I had stood still, quiet, and built something while they were busy tearing me out of the frame. I clicked accept, closed the laptop, and whispered, more to myself than anyone else, it begins again, this time on my terms. Some chapters end not with revenge, but with release. The box was small, the same size as when I had first mailed it, except now it bore a red stamp. Return to sender. My handwriting was still there, a little smudged from weather or carelessness, but unmistakably mine. I placed it on the kitchen table, didn't open it right away. It was the birthday gift I had sent my mother months before she died. A delicate scarf, woven with her favorite blue-greens, tucked in with a handwritten card. When I finally lifted the lid, the scarf was untouched. Still folded the way I had wrapped it. The note remained sealed. I knew, before confirming it, that she'd never seen it. A few hours later, I got the confirmation, from someone who used to work at the hospital. Sable gave her one just like it the same day, they said. Claimed she picked it out herself. Of course she did. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just exhaled. That evening, as the sky turned a dusty rose and spring brushed across the window panes, my phone rang. It was her. Sable. I didn't answer right away. Let it ring to the edge of voicemail, then picked up. Her voice sounded different, softer but hollow. I didn't expect you to win, she said. I didn't come to win, I replied. She paused, then added, but I didn't think you'd burn it all down. I stood by the sink, one hand gripping the edge of the counter. I didn't burn anything, I said. I just stopped watering what was killing me. There was a long silence. Not heavy, just, Honest. I was always better at pretending things were fine, she said eventually. You did it cleaner than I ever could have. I didn't thank her. I didn't offer forgiveness. Some ties don't snap. They just loosen until they're no longer holding anything at all. After we hung up, I didn't feel closure. Just clarity. I went to my office and opened the drawer with the last of the documents. Legal notes, scanned pages, all the administrative carnage left behind after fighting people who should have protected me. I pulled out the forged will, held it for a long time. Then, quietly, I burned it. Not out of spite, not because I needed revenge, because I was done letting it sit beside things that had real meaning. I kept the letter from my mother. The USB. Those didn't go anywhere. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, I had cleaned out the drawer. The weight of old fights, old names, old ghosts, all finally cataloged and closed. I poured myself tea, sat on the couch, and watched the city lights blink on like stars too proud to wait for darkness. My phone buzzed gently on the table beside me. An email. Subject: Redefining Power. Final speaker confirmation. I didn't even open it. The subject line said everything. They'll keep rewriting the story, I whispered. But I've stopped asking for a page. Some names are whispered in fear. Others are spoken in power. Mine will be remembered in silence. The ballroom at the National Women's Leadership Conference was nothing like the spaces I'd fought in before. No walnut-paneled walls, no guarded boardroom glances. Just a sea of unfamiliar faces. Strangers who weren't interested in family trees, but in what you'd grown through. The lights dimmed. My name appeared on the screen, spelled correctly for once. Please welcome Delphine Maynard. Applause swelled. Not thunderous, but steady. Like acknowledgement, not obligation. I walked up slowly, taking each step as if laying brick beneath my own name. At the podium, I let the silence sit for a moment before I began. I never wanted a war, I said, voice even, steady. I only wanted a seat. When none was offered, I built the table. I wasn't there to tell them about betrayal, not directly. I was there to talk about structure, strategy, the quiet kind of strength that outlasts noise, the kind you build in shadows when everyone else is looking at the spotlight. I told them the story, parts of it, about what it means to be edited out, to be made invisible while standing in the center of the frame, about silence used as erasure and silence used as armor. My voice trembled once when I said, they called me unstable because I didn't scream. They called me ungrateful because I didn't bow. But it steadied. It always did. The room didn't stir. No coughs, no whispers. Just breath held, shared. Midway through, I paused, looked out at the rows of women, business leaders, mothers, community builders, people who knew how pain could polish. There was a man, I said, who once looked me in the face and said, "We don't serve beggars." I let that sit. Then I smiled, slow and true. Funny, I said. Now they all line up to serve me. Not a laugh, just stillness. Then, slowly, hands came together. Not all at once, not a standing ovation, but something better. Sustained applause, lasting. When I stepped off stage, I didn't look back. I traveled home the next day. The air outside my apartment was different, or maybe I was. The heaviness was gone, replaced with something steadier. Not pride, not peace, but place. In the mail, a letter. No return address. Inside, a single slip of paper, typed simply, "You spoke for all of us." I read it once, then folded it and placed it in the drawer beside my mother's note. That night, I didn't work, didn't plan. Just sat by the window, tea cooling on the sill, and watched the city exhale beneath me. I didn't just survive them, I whispered. I outgrew them. This isn't the end of a name. It's the start of a legacy. Sometimes the loudest power is the one that doesn't shout. It simply refuses to disappear. If you've followed my story from the beginning, you know by now. I didn't win because I screamed louder. I won because I stayed standing long after the shouting stopped. There were days I questioned my worth, moments I believed their version of me, and nights I wanted to disappear into the silence they forced upon me. But what I learned, what I want you to carry, is that your value doesn't come from who claps for you. It comes from knowing, deeply and quietly, who you are when no one's watching. To anyone out there who's ever been erased, overlooked, or rewritten by someone else's fear or ambition, you are not alone. Maybe you're the sibling who was left out of the story, the colleague passed over, the child forgotten in family politics. Maybe you're the quiet one in the back, building your own table while everyone else fights over a seat. Speak when you're ready, and speak in a way they can't ignore. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should have seen you most? What did you do, or what do you wish you had done? Let's start that conversation in the comments. If this story resonated with you, if it made you pause, or cry, or breathe a little deeper, drop a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And hey, if it didn't land with you, tell me why. I'm here to listen too. And don't forget, if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. More stories are coming. Ones about quiet strength, second chances, and the power of not giving up. I'll see you there.